development here at the Religious Action Center. We're so excited to have all of you here with us. We know that our numbers will continue to rise, 128 now, and with many more who've registered who we know will continue to trickle in. But for those of you that are here at 2 o'clock, we begin at 2 o'clock. Excited to have so many people here from all over the country. I encourage you, as has become a custom based on our last webinar, if you're here, share in the chat with us, which you can find on the right side, where you're from, so we know who's here with us. We know that we have people from all over the country, and we're excited to have you here because the strength of our movement is the diversity of places that we come from. We're excited to have you here as part of the Religious Action Center's nonpartisan civic engagement campaign. Every congregation counts, every vote counts. A note that we'll ask that you continue to remain on mute until we have question and answer time at the end. The webinar is also being recorded, so you can always go back and see it. And the recording, the slide deck, and all of the resources will be available in an email that will be sent out following this webinar. So if you miss something, don't worry, you'll be able to go back to it. You see something you like and you want to forward to a friend, share with other people in your community, people that are going to be working with you in this, there's a way to do that. By driving nonpartisan civic engagement and voter engagement work, and doing this work as a community, whether that's your congregation, your sisterhood, your youth group, whatever it might be, by pledging and working toward becoming a 100% voting community or congregation, it allows each of us to be part of this greater movement and allows us to act on our belief that our democracy is strongest when everyone can and does participate, regardless of party or politics. The goal of nonpartisan voter engagement is not to elect candidates or parties. The goal is to connect with elected officials and to increase our ability to advance the policies that reflect our Jewish values. Elected officials pay attention to voter turnout. Mobilizing our communities to vote will help us have better access to elected officials and increase clout, putting us in a stronger position to advocate for the issues that we care about. There's so much going on in our world right now, and we think of the issues of immigration. We have Rabbi Jonah Pesner down in McAllen, Texas today, with other leaders from our movement. We know that elected officials will listen more closely to us when we as a reform movement are making sure that our people are getting to the polls and voting. Voters are also more likely to volunteer, stay civically engaged, and as community members are mobilized to vote, leaders often emerge, allowing us to identify people who can continue the justice work in our communities. And when we're acting together as a movement, this strength increases exponentially. To ground us in our Jewish values and offer some additional framing for what we'll be learning today, I'm so excited to have Rabbi Michael Holtzman, who's the rabbi at Northern Virginia Hebrew Congregation in Reston, who's a friend, who's really smart, and is doing incredible justice work with his congregation.
So thank you, Michael. It's an honor to be here and to talk with everybody. I am going to start off by trying to make the case that voting is a mitzvah and Election Day should be a Jewish holiday. And the reason I can make that case is because the definition of what makes something a mitzvah, a sacred act, and what makes a holiday a sacred day is that these things and the actions we do on them communicate our values. They communicate what's deeply held for each one of us. And these mitzvot, these actions and these holidays, they connect with our Jewish identity. So these are our values and our Jewish core values put together into one action or one day. And the examples of this are, of course, obvious. You take something like Passover, right? We have a Seder. It's a bunch of great food and family engagement and everyone being together and a good time. Most families, unless there's a partisan divide. And then, of course, Seder can be a little tough. But we get together and we go through this ritual on this holy day, and it communicates our opposition to tyranny. It communicates that we uphold freedom as personal values and Jewish values. So what's the Jewish value in voting, and what's the sacred act in Election Day? Well, we start off with the value of creating the world that we live in, right? Our Torah starts off with God telling the people in the garden that they have to tend the garden and till the garden. that we are put here to be partners in creation. So if the world is broken right now, I hate to say it, but it's partly our fault. We created this world, and if we don't like the way it is, we have the obligation to recreate it, to change it. And so when we vote, we participate in the most basic fundamental act of changing the world in a democratic system, right? The second Jewish value is that we have to stand against cynicism. Unfortunately, we're living in a time where people feel disempowered, people feel disenfranchised. Some of the reasons they're disenfranchised are actual legal disenfranchisement. But the feeling of cynicism, it just pervades our society right now. And as Jews, we know the words that are hanging on the wall in the yeshiva of Rabbi Nachman, which say, Jews don't despair. We stand against despair. We are always for hope, and we are never cynical. So while our politics out there in the world can get ugly and polarized and disconnected, we take to heart the lesson of the law that says, Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is the law, which traditionally has meant that we have to follow the laws of the state that we're living in. I want to propose that this phrase means we have to make the laws that we're living, the laws of the land that we're living in, and we can't do that through any other system than democracy, and that breaks through our cynicism. Third Jewish value, that is to be pursuers of peace, and I must pause and honor my teacher, Rabbi Aaron Pankin, who we're still mourning, and as we learned around the time of his memorial service, we must be like the disciples of Aaron and pursue peace. And peace might seem impossible in a world where children are being locked up in cages at the border. Peace might seem hard. We have to remember the teaching of the military historian Karl von Clausewitz, who said that war is the continuation of politics by other means. I want to offer the reversal of that, which is that politics is the prevention of war by other means. And as we saw in Charlottesville last summer, just almost a year ago, when the political system does not succeed, violence follows. So when we vote and we get other people to go vote and be engaged in the civic process, we're promoting peace, we're preventing violence. Last, as Reformed Jews, we take seriously our commitment to live in the world, and our world is America. And as Jews, we've lived all over the world throughout our history. America has been the unique example of a place that welcomes and promotes and supports Jews. And we cannot allow the American experiment to fail. So we have 4 different Jewish values: creating the world, standing against cynicism, promoting peace, and making sure the American experiment continues for the sake of the survival of Jewish people. That's why voting is a mitzvah, and that's why Election Day is a Jewish holiday. So that's it, Michael.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Holtzman, for helping to ground this, right? This is the foundation of who we are. We are the Reform movement. And our Jewish values are what ground us in this work. And so it's important that that's at the front of what we talk about today. The goal of today's call is to train us to do this critical voter engagement work in our communities, including steps to help you become a 100% voting community. The RAC has spent considerable time developing this campaign to ensure that the work happens on the ground is effective, that it's research-based, and that it's grounded in the best principles of impactful voter engagement work. And today, what we're looking to do is to cover principles of doing effective voter engagement work, to propose and unpack a model for how you can do this work in your congregation and in your Reformed Jewish community, and to hear from leaders in congregations who can share their stories, to give examples of voter engagement work during past election cycles. And at the end, we will share where you can access all of the resources that we're referring to throughout. And a reminder that if you are from the state of California, stay on the Zoom. Stay on this Zoom. At the end, there's going to be a special opportunity for those of you from California to talk about what's happening in California specifically. To start us off, excited to have the talented and wonderful Shira Zemmel, our Director of Youth Leadership Development Work at the RAC, who'll be sharing some of those key principles that we're going to keep in mind about voter engagement work.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here. When thinking about voter engagement work and how you can best situate your community to achieve 100% voting, we did a lot of research and have talked to a lot of leaders to figure out what principles are we going to bring into our communities to help our communities achieve 100% voting. So these principles are research-based on it's grounded in the idea of voter engagement contacts as being the most effective at getting new and infrequent voters to the polls. So when talking about principles of voter engagement and how you as leaders in your communities can turn the principles into action, we're going to be talking about turning out people who are not regular voters, and the way to do this by contacting them in different ways. So we're going to refer to these different communications as voter contacts. So when you're communicating with a voter, it's a voter contact. So the first principle, make sure your contact with voters is personal and relational. When it comes to voter engagement, the messenger matters the most. The most effective voter turnout tactics are those that maximize human interaction, interpersonal, let's talk to people, let's build relationships, and foster a sense of community and personal connection. That's what matters most. So the most effective voter engagement contact is when you have a conversation with someone, a conversation between two people. I was just talking to college students about who want to do this on their campus, and I said, I wish I had had a reason when I got to my large university freshman year to start talking to people I didn't know, because I was hard to meet people. So this would have been a great way for me to get involved or meet new people by having conversations. That is the most effective way to get people to pledge to vote. It's important to think about who is contacting a voter. So voter mobilization research shows us that people are more likely to participate in elections when contacted personally by people they know or are more connected to. This includes being contacted by groups they are affiliated with and trust, putting your congregation or your Reformed Jewish community or group at a great advantage for contacting your networks and members about voting. Personal outreach to voters is done well by friends and family members too. So this makes young people, even if they're under 18, great messengers to get other young people to vote. So in addition to who is contacting a voter, it's important to think about the way we're getting in contact with them. So for example, in personal conversations at events and after services during ONEG, conducting phone banks to call voters are more effective than sending an email or posting on social media. That's not to say that these modes aren't useful to help enhance your work or lift it up, but it's really important to remember that this is about personal, building relationships and having conversations. Which brings us to principle number 2. So make sure your contact with voters is repeated. Contact with the voter should be done multiple times, and your community's voter engagement strategy should account for reaching voters multiple times prior to election day. So research tells us that one voter contact is not enough to get a new or infrequent voter to the polls. Multiple contacts are necessary. We will talk more about what this type of strategy could look like for your community in a few minutes, but one thing to remember is that attempting to contact a voter, such as calling and getting an answering machine, is different than actually speaking with them on the phone or otherwise. So you should be keeping track to make sure everyone is contacted repeatedly to see the highest impact on voter turnout. And again, we'll talk about how to do this in just a few minutes. So this brings us to our next principle. Keep track of who you contact. Make your voter engagement work strategic and effective. And so it's important that from the start, you're keeping track of everyone you contact, the method by which you contact them, and the result. This way you can reach out to people that haven't been contacted and also follow up with people you already contacted about voting so that the communication's repeated. In addition to making your voter engagement work leading up to the election most effective, keep track of contacts will help your community with your social justice work following the election and will help strengthen your future civic engagement efforts and building up your community and thinking about where are leaders who might want to get engaged in other initiatives in your congregation and community. So you may want to call people who you engaged in this about other efforts that you're doing, attending a rally, doing a Mitzvah project, all types of things that all your great congregations do all the time, getting more people involved in the effort. A good way to keep track is set up a spreadsheet where everyone's name and contact information along with one column for each of the possible ways that they were contacted or engaged through your engagement work. So start with a list of your congregation or community members, keep track of your contacts. Doesn't have to be fancy or expensive. Just keeping the information up to date and easy to use and accessible for people who are leading the effort. So Following the webinar, you're going to receive an email with our online resources to help with the voter engagement work, including a sample voter contact spreadsheet to help you get started doing exactly what I just said. So the good way to have personal or repeated contact that make it easy to keep track of who you interact with is through voter pledge cards. By asking people to fill out a voter pledge card, you're helping increase the accountability of voters to themselves, their friends, their families, and their community. Pledging to vote has proven to be effective turnout mechanism in voter engagement efforts, and pledge cards are a fantastic tool to use when having in-person conversations with voters. So we're going to be talking about how your community can utilize these voter pledge cards through training, but I was shocked when I saw the research about how pledge cards have been used in elections recently, and what tool that was for people to build up the list, to keep track of their contacts, and to continue these multiple engagements. So when applying these principles, there are a few more additional things to remember. Voting is habit forming. We are creating the habit of voting. So once you start voting, you get hooked and you do it early and often. And I have my mom to thank that I am a regular voter, because she took me to the polls all the time when I was a kid. I got that future voter sticker, and now I never miss an election, even a hyper local primary, county government, anything, because it is habit forming. Research tells us that. So you're helping people create good habits by getting them to pledge to vote now. Voting is meaningful, both in our Jewish context, as Rabbi Holtzman, my great friend and teacher, shared with us, but it's also meaningful in our American context. It is the way we have to exercise our voice. And how can we not take that opportunity and make sure everyone in our community is taking that opportunity too? And the last thing is, and I want to end with this, is that voting is fun. Voting is great. You got to go there, you got to meet some people in your neighborhood, and you have fun. You get a sticker. It's fun. So why not do it? So those are our principles that are going to ground us in looking at this model and opportunity for your congregation, like in the day-to-day. What does this mean to do? That's what we're going to turn to. So I'm really excited to introduce my friend and colleague Lee Winkleman, the California Organizing Director, who's going to share with us a model for voter engagement that uses these principles to help think about what your congregation could plan. Thanks so much.
Hello, everybody. So I'm going to give you a concrete example of how we apply the principles that Shira just talked about. Those are the principles of relational contact, right? That our contact needs to be a conversation, needs to be personal. Repeated contact. One conversation is not enough to make a new or infrequent voter into a regular voter. You need multiple contacts. And the need to keep track of your contacts. So I'm going to present you a model. Here is the important thing you need to know. You'll need to adapt the model to fit your community, right? The principles that we're talking about, they're universal. They apply to all communities, but exactly how you apply them is different in different communities, right? The model that we're going to present to you with adaptations will be useful in youth groups and among teens. It'll be useful in big congregations and small congregations, but you know your communities best. You're the expert, so you know how to adapt it to fit your community. And I will say one other thing. We aspire to be 100% voting congregations and communities, right? We aspire to get everyone vote. We may think, oh, everyone in our community votes, and we probably do vote above the national average, but that doesn't mean that everyone votes. And so we know that everyone in our congregation does not vote, and that our aspiration, the reason we're doing this voter engagement work, is to move us closer to become 100% voting congregations and communities. Now I say the code word that Elizabeth and I did, Zeppelin. Thank you, Elizabeth. We picked Zeppelin because we knew it would fit naturally into the conversation. Okay, so before you can do the work, you need to prepare. And the first thing is you need to assemble and train a team, right? This successful voter engagement work is not something a couple of people can do. It takes a village. So you need to put together a team of people and train them in how we do this work, what the mission is, and have them ready to go out and have all these conversations that we're talking about. The second thing is, one of our principles was you need to track your voter contacts, right? If you're doing multiple contacts, you won't know whether you're actually succeeding in reaching people. If your goal is 3 times, as I'm going to suggest, we won't know if you will be able to reach people the number of times you want unless we keep track. So you need to decide what is your list of people that you're going to use. Are you going to use the your congregation membership list or some other list. You want to make sure that everyone who fills out a pledge card gets added to the list, because signing that pledge card is your first contact, as we will discuss. And there'll be a lot of information, really, for everything I'm talking about today. There will be a lot of information in the RAC's guide to doing voter engagement work, which is available on our website. So when I talk about scripts, when we talk about spreadsheets, all that is in what the voter cards look like. All that is on our website. You'll get a lot of help and a lot more detail about the things we're talking about today. The first contact we're going to make is using the pledge card. So here's what you got to remember about the pledge card. It's a relational tool, right? You want to be using it to have conversations. So the goal of the pledge card is to give you a excuse or vehicle to have a conversation with people about their voting. It's not the other way around, that the goal of the conversation is get people to sign the pledge card. The important thing is, even more than the pledge card, is actually the conversation you have with somebody when they sign it. All right? And the pledge card can be used in conjunction with a voter registration campaign. We used to think that if all we needed to do was register everybody, and then that would increase the number of people who voted. And what research has shown is that registration alone does not make someone likely to vote. You need to register them, and then you need to contact them multiple times in a relational way. So do the voter registration with teens in your congregation who are just coming of age and others who are unregistered, but make sure that you are following up with the contacts and they sign a pledge. Zeppelin. So let's do a hypothetical thought experiment. What if you have a great pledge card and you put it on your website and you put it on tables outside the congregation, but you don't do anything else? What is going to happen with that pledge card? Please write in the chat box. All right, we have a couple people who are saying nothing, not much. Not many people will fill it out. All right, let's say by some miracle you get 200 people fill out the card that they took from the table and that they found on the website. What then happens, even if they frequent flyer congregation, I like that. What happens if they sign the pledge site, but no one has a conversation with them? Will that make them more likely to vote? A lot of people are giving the right answer here. No, it will not make them more likely to vote, right? So don't get focused. A congregation that has 200 people registered to vote but only had 10 conversations doing it is less successful than a congregation that has 100 people, half the number, who sign pledge cards but has 100 congregations, right? So just remember that your goal here is really not so much to get as many people to sign the pledge, but to have as many conversations with the pledge as possible. Okay. So where do you go in your congregation to have these conversations with people about the pledge card? Why don't you write in the chat box again where you might go to have these conversations? Where are people in your congregation that you can have them? Sunday morning at religious school drop-off is great. ONEGs are great. Adult ed classes, family school, small meetings, before and after services. Ooh, a Sunday morning bagel bar. I want to come to your congregation. Torah study. Like, there are all sorts of places. Elizabeth, you can put up the next slide. Zeppelin. So there's all these places you can go. It's different for every congregation. A youth group event is great. Go to all these places where people are. Yes, as someone suggested, you could sit behind a table. And then when anyone comes to you, you have a conversation. But it's much better if you go to where they are and don't make them come to you. So go into the ONEG, go before services, go to Torah study, go into youth group, wherever people are, have those conversations. All right, next slide. So when you want to do the pledge, you want to have a script so that people know what to say. Now, the script is not something that people are going to say word for word, but they're going to be nervous at first. And what will happen is they'll start using the script in the beginning, but then they'll develop their own way, which is great. We don't necessarily want them to do it word for word. And then success in this is the same. You are successful in this in the same way as you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice, 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 right? So have people pair off and practice with each other. One of them can be the person talking, one of them can be the congregant, and you practice and then they switch. That kind of practice will make people feel comfortable about this, right? We have pledge cards that you can order and use. They look a lot like the one pictured in the bottom of the slide. So you can get them on our website and order as many as you like. We're happy to send them to you, all right? And then when you have a conversation and someone signs a pledge, you want to make sure that you record it on your contact list, so you know that you've had this first contact, and it will help you when you get to the second contact. Okay, next slide. All right, so there are two ways you can do a phone bank, and I'm going to tell you both of them. The first is the traditional phone bank. So you have your call list from the list you've been working at. You prepare a script. You have people practice, practice, practice. Have them come with their cell phones and their chargers to the phone bank. And you have a leader who will do the training and make sure people practice, and then kind of doesn't themselves make calls, but goes around, listens to people, gives them advice if they're not quite doing it right, answers questions, help people. Maybe toward the end when everything's going smoothly, then the leader can start making calls. But what's most important is the leader is supporting all the people making calls. You want to record the results of the phone bank on your voter list, and you will need more than one night of phoning, because a lot of the people you call will not be home. And you want to do it enough that you actually get everyone or as many as possible. Next slide. So the second way to do a phone bank is what we're now calling the Friends and Family Plan. I think we made that up. The Friends and Family Plan was used in the 2016 election cycle. And of all the methods that were researched during that cycle, it was shown to be the most effective at turning out voters. And the idea behind the Friends and Family Plan is that you have people reach out to the people they know, their friends and family. Because as Shira told us, when someone you know reaches out to you, that's the most effective way of reaching out. So let's go to the next slide. So let me ask you, have you ever been in a group where they said, all right, we want you all to bring 1 or 2 people to our next meeting or to the next action? And did it work? Yes, each one to reach one. All right, so we have some people saying yes, some people say sometimes, and many saying no. My experience has been mostly no. And I'll tell you why this Friends and Family Plan is different than asking people, go out and bring someone to the next meeting. If you can go to the next slide, Elizabeth. All right, so it's all in accountability. Right? If you go and say to someone, bring someone, and they don't say who, and they don't say what, and no one really checks in, they're going to be a little uncomfortable on inviting people, and they probably won't do it. But if you have people sit down and identify 10 to 20 friends and family members that they're going to call, and share that list with the group, and say to them, we're going to be checking back, everyone's going to be reaching out to their people, then you're creating a kind of accountability where everyone is accountable to the whole group. Like, I said I'm going to do this, they're going to ask me, I know I need to do it, or I will let them down. All right? So you want to create that kind of accountability, and you can either have them all come together and do the calls like in the traditional phone bank, or you can ask people to set a specific deadline and make the calls and have conversations perhaps in person on their own, right? In either way, you can do that latter as long as you do this in a way that's accountable, that people say to everyone who they're calling, that there's check-in, that someone calls and reminds them in the middle and checks in how it's going, so they know that this is something they're accountable and have to do. In the end, you want to make sure everyone reports their results back to the whole group. That's part of the accountability plan. I had 20 people on my list. I got a hold of 18 of them, Uncle John and Aunt Marge. I couldn't reach them. And they had great conversations, and they were really happy I told. Like that kind of reporting makes people feel real good about what they did, and it makes them more likely to keep doing the things they say they're going to do in the future. And then you also need to record the results in the tracking list so you know that. We can move to the next slide. The third contact is the text message bank. This is something you do right before the election. So when you are doing the pledges, you want to get people's cell phone numbers. And when you do the second contact, you talk to them on the phone. If you don't have the cell phone number, you can ask them a second time. And you can add it to the list. So you have all the cell phone numbers. You can ideally, you would send out personal texts, right? You'd say, hey, this is Lee. I talked to you on the phone. about this, and I just want to, you said you were going to vote, and I just want to remind you, the election's coming up on Tuesday. Be sure and go to the polls, right? That's the ideal world. You can send out mass emails. Mass emails are not so personal, and we all know how many emails we get and how much we don't get to read all our emails. Not the most effective way, but if you add it to everything else, it can be something that helps. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so the model for voter engagement. This is all review. You are going to make sure that however you adapt this model for your congregation or community, whether you are teens or large congregations or small congregations, you're going to use these principles. Multiple contacts with potential voters, relational contacts, personal contacts, having a conversation, and using lists to track your voters. All right? You are going to adapt this model, and it's not a recipe to be followed exactly. It's something to adapt according to the nature of your community. And you are the only expert who knows that. And all the things I talked about today, there is more information and examples on our website, so use the RAC resources to get help. Great. I now turn this on to whoever comes next, Eric and B.
Excellent. So a quick note before we introduce our next speakers. The RAC staff, along with others in our lay leadership, have done a lot of research around this. We've been reading articles, meeting with partner organizations that have been doing this work in elections, meeting with academics who research this, and really looking at what are the best principles. And that's what you're hearing from Shira and Lee, taking these best principles and thinking, how can we apply them to our congregations, our community? So that's what we're doing here. And then what we did is we had conversations and we said, where are there congregations that are taking these best principles that have been shown to work, and who's doing it and can be a model and show it's possible. It can happen in a congregation. It can happen in your community. So the first folks we're going to hear from, Eric Stockel and B. Richmond from Leo Beck Temple in Los Angeles, California. Eric and B are the co-chairs of Leo Beck's Community Organizing Leadership Team, or COLT. I turn it over to them.
They may need help unmuting.
Are we muted or not muted?
You're good now.
Okay, excellent. I can't see a thing, so there you go. Hi, Eric Stockel.
B. Richmond.
We're excited to be here today. I want to start by saying that we've been doing this voter engagement work, really for a couple of years at Leo Beck, and some of these best practices that we were excited to learn about in the previous two presentations are not things that we necessarily applied originally. We were kind of feeling our way. So it's apparently my role to give a brief background on how we got to where we are. We started organizing here in 2011 and built a team of 20 to 25 leaders who met regularly, did an extensive listening campaign, and eventually settled on a campaign, an issue that resonated with our membership from what we heard from them, and it had to do with improving the economy here in the Los Angeles area, and it focused really on improving transportation around the county, and specifically in the area where our temple is located, which is the Sepulveda Pass, which is basically ground zero for gridlock here in Los Angeles, at least. So ultimately, we worked for about 4 years to get a ballot measure onto the ballot in November of 2016, and to have it include something for our particular region. And what came to pass was what was called Measure M. It will raise something on the order of $160 billion with a B dollars over the next 40 years to improve transit in LA County, and also about $9 billion to build what we think will be a train under a tunnel, or in a tunnel through our particular Sepulveda Pass. And once we got it on the ballot, we realized that our work really turned to getting the thing passed in front of the voters, and we had the unique challenge of something that needed a 2/3 vote to pass. And so we felt that in order to be good allies with the people, the coalition that we had helped to build in support of this, we needed to turn our own people out. So our goal really was to contact 100% of our temple's voters in the lead up to November election, and get them aware of the issue and to obviously to vote. And we started kind of with Lee's supposition, which was, hey, we're a bunch of relatively educated, relatively well-to-do West Side Jews, everybody votes. And the answer really was that wasn't true. We ran our congregation's membership list against the 2012 general election. And although it wasn't a perfect apples to apples comparison, because we were using 2016 membership to see who voted in 2012, and presumably some people had maybe turned 18 in the interval and weren't eligible to vote in 2012. But we had about a 74% turnout, maybe a little bit higher in 2012, and we felt we needed to do better. And so we started by having pledge cards placed on everybody's seats for the High Holy Days. The low-hanging fruit was asking people to check a box, yes, I'll vote. The next box, I think, was yes, I'll vote in favor of Measure M, which was the thing we were pushing for. And then we were asking people to check the boxes, I will participate in a phone bank, and or I will participate in voter canvassing efforts going door to door. And building off of that, we had phone banks. We had about 4, I believe, organized by somebody who was very into data analytics. So it was the spreadsheet, kind of like what Lee showed you. And we reached out to all approximately 1,000 eligible voters in our congregation, urging them to vote for this measure and obviously to vote in general in the election. And we managed to increase our voter turnout to something on the order of 90%, which was a huge, huge gain, obviously, and a big deal. So by the way, the measure did pass. It got 71% of the vote. We're still working with county officials to make sure it's implemented properly. And we have turned our efforts sort of in a twofold direction. One, we're still working, obviously, on issues that we care about in our congregation. We are building relationships with elected officials in their offices, trying to meet with them regularly. And we've declared ourselves a 1% voting congregation, meaning our goal now is to get from 90 to 100, that's 10%. And how we're doing that, I'm turning it over to Bea.
Thanks so much, Eric. So what I'm going to be talking about is what we actually did, what worked, what didn't work, the lessons we learned, and who was on our team, and how we did recruit and how we plan to recruit in the future. I will say that all the people that participated in this effort along with us and who volunteered really did see it as a labor of love and their civic duty and responsibility. And so finding people who have that sensibility, I think, is key. If it's at all a drudge, it's not going to work. So we broke it up into 2 phases. Our first phase was a voter registration effort, both within our community, and we also got a small group of us to be trained by the ACLU to go into local jails and actually help recruit eligible voters who are incarcerated. Our second phase is really more of the kind of voter engagement that Eric was talking about earlier, and also get out the vote efforts through phone and also some email. I must admit we did use that method. We also had some outreach and voter education events to promote ballot initiatives, and we did engage in a pretty strong effort to gather signatures for an initiative here in California called Schools and Communities First. That signature gathering effort is still ongoing, so we don't really know the results of that. We also plan to create what's called a voter card. A local congregation here in Los Angeles, E-Car, actually did this last year and prepared a little wallet-sized card so that everybody in the congregation knows who their representatives are. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It's important for mobilization efforts. If we are going to have to rely on the congregation to do some phone call or emailing our elected officials. The other reason is to know where the concentration of our citizens are, which districts they live in. Again, ultimately for mobilization efforts around any specific initiatives that we're trying to promote. So let me tell you what worked. What worked is we had an amazing, actually Eric referenced him, an amazing retired math professor who created the most unbelievable spreadsheets and was responsible for managing and sorting voter information corresponding to the VAN system. We also did a special effort to reach out to infrequent voters and reached about 300 people, and were successful in registering over 40 unregistered voters out of our 900 plus in the congregation. So we also sent out information in our weekly bulletin in the ramp up to the June primary to remind people about what the voter registration deadline was, and also to encourage them to vote. And we reached out to the religious school community to talk to students who could pre-register. We were less successful in that effort, but we'll make it part of our next year's plan cycle. So I will say that what didn't work relates to the term infrequent voters. We were trying to be efficient, and so we essentially carved out the names of infrequent voters and called them specifically. What we found out was that people felt targeted by that, and we got some pushback around that, and there were those who felt uncomfortable about how we got to this information, despite the fact that we assured them that it was publicly available. So the lesson learned is that you need to prioritize your list. That should be invisible to the recipient of the call, and you should call everybody and just, again, prioritize maybe the people who are infrequent voters, but they needn't know that that's why they're being called first. And then to not be afraid to have conversations with people who are giving you pushback, because we actually came up with a really, really good suggestion to create a video, a multi-generational video about why I vote, and the pre-registration candidates why they want to vote. So use the relational opportunity to get more information. Finally, I'll just say we started out with a relatively small team to develop a proposal that was presented to our Board of Trustees to make sure that we received approval to move forward. Once the approvals were received, we developed a script. Our first group of Get Out the Vote phone volunteers were identified through our community organizing leadership team, and we even included a middle schooler who's committed to getting out the vote and already made his own calls as a young teen in 2016. Again, we anticipate doing more work with our religious school parents and students and community of elders as we lead up to the general election, and we have to report some positive results. Eric, anything you want to add?
Nope.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Bea and Eric. Next, we're going to hear from Rabbi Kimberly Herzog-Cohen and Alex Horn. Rabbi Cohen is the rabbi, and Alex is the Associate Director of Social Justice and Young Adult Community at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, Texas.
Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to follow Leo Beck, folks. I grew up going to Leo Beck, and you all are doing amazing work. And, for me personally, having grown up in a congregation like Leo Beck, civic engagement was just kind of part of the everyday conversations there. And I think what's important is to be able to ground any of this work about voting, civic engagement in the story of your congregation. For us here in Dallas, Texas, which of course is a little different than Los Angeles, as I've learned, but here in Dallas, Texas, Temple Emmanuel has had a very long standing history of civic engagement, going back to a really strong partnership with clergy and lay leaders in the 60s when Dallas was one of just really the only city that didn't have public school kindergartens. And our lay leaders realized that they couldn't just set up more and more kindergartens. They needed to go to the school board. They needed to put pressure on our congregants to get out and really care about who they were voting in to school board positions. So I think that link between the issues we care about, the work that we're doing in the community every day, and what's at stake in elections, and what elected officials actually decide on an ongoing basis in our cities is really important. I've seen in some of the Zoom group chat about the idea of education. And one of the things that has been really powerful for us is to have candidate forums through our broad-based work with Faith in Texas. That's where you can hear the candidates really talk about the issues, and people can learn about what's at stake. So I'm going to just speak to a few very briefly, more kind of broad brushstroke ideas, and Alex is going to speak more specifically about the work that we've done to this point. I would say that it's an ongoing learning process for us. Being able to set really clear goals and bring all the parties together into one space is something that we're learning is essential to do again and again, to over communicate and to make sure that you're not just kind of throwing ideas at the wall to see what sticks, but to kind of commit to specific strategies. So as I said, embedded in the work of your temple story, and also to recognize that what's really powerful about civic engagement and voting work is that it truly is not about each party. This is about exercising our responsibility, our civic responsibility. And for us here in Dallas, Texas, that's really important, where we have a really diverse base. Although I would say, you know, most people, if they're going to be a member here, they're going to know that this is a place where we talk about issues, we talk about politics. We kind of don't hide from that. And so anything from our civic engagement and voting work is kind of coming from a larger place of just engagement around the issues that we care about in an ongoing way. But it is something that, like immigration, which we've really worked on a lot, kind of covers more of the political spectrum. So some of the work that we've done has been through Faith in Texas, our broad-based group through PICO, or now Faith in Action. And we also have had individual congregants who have come to us with, you know, unique kind of passionate particularities within the voting engagement work that they have wanted to pursue. And sometimes that's within the larger temple structure. And sometimes we're encouraging people to do that. And we will partner in certain ways and in other ways not. So I think, you know, it's a very dynamic process for us to figure out all the different players in it and how to be able to remain focused and effective.
So like Rabbi Kim mentioned, we sort of are in a trial and error period. We are setting our clear goals. We're sort of thinking of this trajectory from now until the November election, and then also calling it our double rainbow. But the arch from November leading into the Texas 2019 legislative session. For those of you who don't know, Texas legislation only meets every other spring. So we are sort of thinking about the next year in those trajectories. So I think the most important thing is, as you are beginning this work, is to set clear goals and expectations and to gather your key stakeholders. So a few key things that we've done so far. We sent out an email to all of our seniors who are graduating high school and are going to be turning 18. We included all of the information they needed, how to register, where to go, where to mail your form, if you're going to college out of state, when are the deadlines to submit those absentee ballots. So the email already has gone out to those seniors. And then we also send college care packages to our college students for the high holidays. And this year, included in those care packages will be information on voting and making sure that if they are out of state, they know what the deadlines are to still be able to vote. So that's just a couple ways that we're engaging young voters. We also have many students who have been involved in the March for Our Lives. And so through that, they are doing a lot of voter registration and voter engagement. So I think that a lot of our young people are getting involved through that. Similar to what has been said already on this webinar, I think for us, the most successful thing has been face-to-face contact. It's really important to be able to put a face behind the emails that they're receiving. We were sort of surprised when we set up booths at like Shabbat dinners or larger events that people didn't even know there was a primary election happening. So a couple things that we created that I wanted to show you all. We created these small business cards. They say pledge to vote. On the back, it says help us become a 100% voting congregation. It has the key dates for the elections. And this is something that we've encouraged our congregants to either put in their car, hang on their refrigerator, maybe put it in their wallet. It's red, it's bright, it's hopefully going to be a friendly reminder to everyone. We also have, through our Faith in Texas work, they gave us these voter pledge cards, but we really love the look of the racks, so we do plan to order some of those as well. But this is something that we started in the early spring, so we already have a stack of those that will be mailed out. And then Shira actually talked about the fun voter stickers. So this is just sort of something fun that we thought would be, you know, another reminder, another thing for people to sort of get behind. It's fun to get the sticker. Everyone likes to post their photos. And so those are just a few things that we've done. I would say moving forward, we actually have a meeting today to strategize for the next several months. And we're planning to do a bunch of stuff with like the opening day of our religious school. We have a big Sukkot bash. And we also are thinking of things like the high holidays when we are in front of many, many, many congregants. And also I think like the high holidays, people feel moved to be part of this sort of work. So we are constantly thinking and changing and adding to our strategy, but those are just a few things that we've done so far. And if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat box.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. And I hope what's interesting is that you heard from both congregations is that really they're thinking of all of the different angles and aspects and ways to get at this, that it's not just a one thing and then that's it. The other thing that I hope that you're hearing is that location, 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 right? That's what the realtors say. But location does really matter. And what we are doing at the Religious Action Center is providing a very broad set of tools, a very broad set of things that you can do, very broad toolkits. And then there is some local research that you'll need to do because some places there's early voting, which provides an opportunity. Some places there's on same day registration. Many places there is not. And registration requirements are different in every single state. So there is some local research that you will need to do in order to be as effective as possible. So very excited about the work, very excited and appreciative for all the questions that have been going in the chat box, and I want to encourage you to continue doing that. I also want to invite Tracy Wolf, who has been a real force behind putting together the voter engagement toolkit that is online and helping to make sure that all of the pieces of the work that we're doing are getting onto the website as quickly as possible. She's our Leadership Development Associate here at the RAC, and she's going to be going over some of the resources that the RAC has available to help your community get started on this work, along with some of the next steps.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael, and thank you to our leaders from Temple Emmanuel in Dallas and Leo Beck Temple for sharing their work and experiences with us so we can further learn how to do this work. So we know we've shared a lot of information with you on this webinar, and it may be overwhelming to start to plan out a strategy for your congregation to engage in meaningful voter engagement work. Like we've been mentioning, there are a lot of resources available on the RAC website to help you every step of the way, so I just wanted to take a moment to walk through all of them and what you can find. The best place for you to go for information on and resources on voter engagement is www.rac.org/voter engagement, and that's pasted up on the slide and will also be emailed out to you. On the side of the PowerPoint now is a picture of what that website looks like if you want to follow along, and all of these resources will also be emailed to you following the webinar. The first set of resources I want to direct your attention to are found under the General Resources heading. The Planning Your Community Civic Engagement Work resource and the Rules for 501c3 Nonprofit Civic Engagement Work resource are both meant to help get your congregation started on the right foot. The planning document prompts you to think about things Lee mentioned earlier, like gathering your team and building your lists, and the 501c3 document provides guidelines to ensure that your congregation or community is working in a nonpartisan way as to not jeopardize your nonprofit tax status. The next set of resources is our voter engagement specific resources. The RACS Voter Engagement Toolkit goes into specifics about the principles that Shira discussed and also provides you with a step-by-step guide and tools to help your community plan voter contact work that we talked about, including phone banks, voter registration, text message banks, and provides additional suggestions for programming and ways to integrate voter engagement into your Reformed Jewish community from now until Election Day. For example, for phone banks, the toolkit provides you with an outline of what to do before, during, and after a phone bank, a sample agenda for training volunteers, a sample script for calling voters, and where to find the types of information that voters will be looking for and asking for, including laws about registering voters in your state and laws about voting in your state. I know folks were asking about that in the chat box, so that's all in the voter engagement toolkit. Below the link to the toolkit is a link to download an Excel template, the one that you were seeing in the PowerPoint presentation, for voter engagement contacts. As everyone mentioned during all of the presentations, keeping track of who you're reaching out to is of the utmost importance. Under the voter engagement resources heading is also where you'll find an order form for the RACS Pledge to Vote postcards. They're pictured on this slide here, and once you fill out the form, we'll send the postcards directly to you so that you can use them as a tool to be in contact with voters. We also have communications and publicity resources available to help your community amplify your work, including social media tips, shareable graphics, and a sign that people can take and post to social media. And as a Reform movement, the hashtag that we're all using on social media is Reform Jews Vote. Finally, this page is always being updated and more resources are being added. In addition to a more thorough instruction guide to help you use the Pledge to Vote postcards, we're also creating a community voting pledge for your whole congregation or community to use together, a blessing for voters, resources for engaging young voters, and Jewish text resources on civic engagement for your congregation to use in worship and in study. And again, everything can be found on www.rac.org/voter engagement and will be emailed to you following this webinar. I just want to say thank you again and then pass it over to Michael to close us out.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you to everyone who spoke. And I hope one of the things that you noticed about the two congregational groups that spoke is that it wasn't one person. Each time there were two, because this is a team sport. Justice work in your community, justice work in your congregation does not happen by one person. It happens because of a team of people come together, and the power of being in a team is incredible. So we're very grateful to them. We're very grateful to Rabbi Holtzman for speaking and helping to ground us in our Jewish values and texts. We hope that what you take away and learn today, that you'll bring back to others in your community, that you'll develop that team, you'll bring together that team of people that can make a plan for the community's work between now and Election Day. If you're from California, stay on the webinar. Stay on the webinar. There's a very important continued conversation. A reminder about our various websites, rac.org/CEC, the main website, rac.org/voter engagement, to access the tools and resources about the civic engagement campaign. The hashtag Reform Jews Vote, use it on social media. A reminder to join the social action group in the tent. That's where you'll find recordings, slides, people are posting questions, people are answering questions, there's a robust conversation going on there. And if you want to learn more about candidate engagement work, hosting a forum, going and asking questions at another forum, 1 week from today, same bat channel, same bat time, we are going to have another training, and this one is going to be focused on candidate engagement. Registration link has been posted in the chat box and can also be found on the RACS website and in the tent. The amazing thing about being part of this reform movement is that we each walk into our Jewish community as individuals, and then we connect with the larger group. And then our congregations, our youth groups, our sisterhoods, all of the arms and parts of the reform movement come together. And when we come together at moments like this, when we join together to make sure that all members of our community are going and voting, when we reach out across lines of difference to work with other communities to make sure that others are voting, there's real power in that. In the way in which we help to make sure that democracy is strengthened and that our values are in the public sphere and moving forward. If we want to make change in the world, then it's important that our elected officials reflect who we are, that our elected officials represent our country. And so having more people voting is one of the ways in which we can do that. So thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for being here. If you're from California, stay on this webinar. And we'll give a moment for others who are not to allow themselves to sign off. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for spending time with us and for learning together. We'll find you in the tent.